Welcome to the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast. Here are your hosts, DJ Marcotte and John Soroyce. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast, the one and only working class podcast. We're the blue-collar ballers. John Soroyce actually is not here today, so we have junior blue-collar baller and fantasy Yoda, Thomas Martell, coming back and joining us here for another episode, this time early quarterback rankings. Welcome, Thom, back to the podcast.
It's good to be here today.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Get some more reps in, you know what I mean? A little practice time. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about top 12 quarterbacks, all the QB ones, and then Thom, our visitor, is going to give us kind of his breakdown and his take on the top 12 quarterbacks, which I can assure you will differ in some ways to ours. But as usual, you can check us out on our Facebook page at Armchair Fantasy Football, on Twitter at Armchair FFPod. I'm on Twitter at Armchair Kingpin. John is on Twitter at John2977. We are also on Instagram at Armchair_fantasy_football. Sorry, I had a brain cramp there. You can email us at armchairfb@gmail.com. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Podbean, and our videos on YouTube. We're trying out Twitch and Facebook Live. We do from time to time. You can find us on all of those platforms if you just search Armchair Fantasy Football, and we'd be right there waiting for you. All right, Thom, before we get into the top 12 quarterbacks, I'm going to do my best at filling in for John in a little news segment here. Not much going on the last several days since we've spoke to the listeners, but there's a few tidbits here and there. One of the tidbits that stood out to my mind, most recent news, Marlon Mack, the Colts offensive coordinator, is calling Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor a 1-and-1 punch. I feel like Marlon Mack's days are numbered in Indy. Maybe just my opinion, but I feel like they're frustrated with his ability to stay healthy. Pretty efficient when he's out there and a better pass catcher, Thom, than people give him credit for. But to me, Jonathan Taylor, and I look at him as a guy coming out of college on the level of a Saquon Barkley or a Zeke Elliott, and I know some analysts feel that way and some do not. Sounds like the NFL doesn't really feel that way based on his second-round draft status, but what do you think of Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack? What kind of dynamic are we looking at there? And do you think Taylor will ultimately take the starting role?
Oh, it's Taylor's job by the end of the year. Marlon Mack's on a contract now, so he'll be out by the end of the year. Taylor is one of those elite guys coming out of college.
I agree with you. I love Jonathan Taylor. I love what he brings to the table. And I never really looked at Marlon Mack as a starting running back in the NFL or a lead workhorse back, whatever you want to call it. I just never looked at him with those sets of eyes. I think at the beginning of the season we'll see some competition maybe between the two, but this is all coach speak. Again, we've talked about it before. What's the offensive coordinator going to do? Go up to Marlon Mack and say, "Sucks to be you, bro. We just drafted Jonathan Taylor. You gone." No, it's not going to happen.
On that team, no, you can't do that.
No, definitely not. So basically what we're saying is do not draft Marlon Mack unless you really just need him for the first few weeks, because it's going to go south after that. The Eagles have interest in adding a veteran running back, which I don't think is necessarily bad for Miles Sanders. Happens to be Carlos Hyde that they're looking at potentially. I don't understand the Carlos Hyde hype train, I guess, that exists with NFL teams. To me, and I know it's a money thing, but to me, how is Devonta Freeman? I'm going to tie this to Devonta Freeman. How is he still out there? And guys like Carlos Hyde and, well, I guess Lamar Miller's not really getting a look lately, but guys like Carlos Hyde are. Is it money? Is that all it is?
I think it's just injuries. Freeman played a lot of downs there for a 2 or 3 year stretch. Hyde was not out on the field every play.
That is true. And Hyde had a pretty decent workload last year. A lot of people don't realize that he carried the rock a fair amount of times. I liked Carlos Hyde once upon a time when he was in San Fran. I was kind of high on him, and then Shanahan came into town and obviously wasn't a fan. But once upon a time, man, Carlos Hyde was a pretty legit fantasy running back for a couple of years there.
5 years ago, though, but
Exactly, and maybe you're right about Freeman. Maybe he's on that same track, but I feel like Freeman could be added to. And I just acquired Keyshawn Vaughn in Dynasty, so I don't hope this doesn't happen. But a guy like Freeman could be added to a Tampa Bay offense and really become a difference maker there. Philly, though, yep, go get Carlos Hyde because I don't want no part of. I got Miles Sanders in Dynasty too, and I don't want no part of Devonta Freeman there. So interesting, Carlos Hyde still getting some looks out on the market and free agency. Joe Mixon, Tom, Bengals have visited with Joe Mixon about a deal. Do you think this deal gets done? They said, quote, he's the type of guy you want to lock up long term. We'll see if we can find the commonality to get that done over time here. And they said they think he's a really good guy. Obviously, he's shown a lot of ability. Is this a Zeke situation where you see a holdout right to the end? Does COVID factor in? I mean, I feel like trying to hold out during COVID is probably a bad idea.
What are you holding out of? There's nothing to hold out right now.
Exactly. Do you think a deal gets done?
Not as much as he thinks he's going to get.
Yeah.
The open market for running backs is not what they used to be.
It's not. And, Zeke got a good deal in McCaffrey. Obviously reset the market there. But this Joe Mixon McCaffrey. The other thing is sometimes dudes get paid what they're not worth. They get paid more than they're worth because of what the market is set by. So my guess is Mixon saw that McCaffrey deal and he's like, cha-ching. I don't know if Mixon deserves it yet because as much as I like the potential of Mixon, I still haven't seen it yet.
It's all potential, and you can't give a contract to a running back on potential.
Exactly. I mean, guys like Zeke and McCaffrey, you've seen them do it on the field, and I've seen flashes from Mixon, but not enough, honestly, to think that he's a guy that should be paid at that level. Just my opinion. Do I think a deal gets done? Probably. Like you said, I don't think it's what he thinks he's going to get, though.
Well, Boyd still has to get paid.
I don't think they're paying Boyd. I think getting Higgins was kind of the indicator that maybe Boyd will be moving on in free agency. I love Boyd, but I don't know if he's getting paid. And of course, Green is a franchise, so his contract will be up again at the end of the year. If in a manner of speaking, I don't think they're re-signing him either. And they got a few years before they have to pay Joe Burrow a butt ton of money.
Well,
presumably.
He hasn't played one down yet. Never mind.
This is true. This is true. But yeah, that's the deal there. Steelers anticipate Big Ben will be ready for Week 1. I hope that's the case because I saw that team without Ben Roethlisberger, and that was not a pretty picture. So, to me, for Juju Smith-Schuster especially, we really want to see Big Ben out there Week 1. And Roethlisberger is a very underrated guy at the quarterback position. Tom, he's kind of a value type of guy, especially this year coming off an injury.
Well, he had 5,000 yards 2 years ago.
Yeah. And he supported Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, as I think both were wide receiver ones 2 years ago. So come back, Big Ben, come back. What else in the news? You remember Jerick McKinnon, Tom?
Vaguely.
He was that guy in Minnesota, pretty solid backup running back, got paid a lot of money by the San Francisco 49ers and has played, I don't think, an entire full game yet.
Even a game?
Preseason,
maybe.
Well, it's not great news about him. He has yet to resume cutting. The team quote said, I think there's always that critical last juncture of a rehab where you go from running straight ahead and everything trying to simulate some of the cutting that goes on in that position specifically. So that's John Lynch that said that. So he's running, and he's running straight, but he's not making cuts yet. And that's kind of not good. And McKinnon is a guy where I remember in our league of record, I drafted him and I hated every minute of it. It was the worst. You
cried the whole time.
I literally did. And what did I do at the end of the draft? I flipped that guy and about 10 other players for, I think it was Kareem Hunt. And then right before Kareem Hunt got suspended, I traded him. So it just goes to show the draft is not the end of the season, folks. You can turn it around. But I drafted Jerick McKinnon in the second round, and I hated every minute of it. And you damn betcha I cried the whole time. And I somehow managed to unload him after telling everybody how bad he sucked the whole draft.
Within minutes of the draft.
Literally within minutes of the end of the draft. That guy wasn't very good at fantasy football, though. So what else we got for news? I don't know. That's about it. There's nothing too exciting going on these days. The schedule came out, so we'll try to break that down. We haven't had quite enough time to to break that down, Tom Brady will start his career against Drew Brees as a Buck, so that's interesting. Patriots finally have a somewhat of a tough schedule after Brady left.
They said it's the toughest in the NFL right now.
Yeah, well, they still have Miami there, and I'm not convinced Miami's going to be all that good. They've won free agency before, quote unquote, and have still stinked. And the Jets are trash, and they play them twice a year. So that's up for debate. But in terms of teams' winning percentage from last year, yes, it is the toughest in the league. So that'll be interesting. The NFC East schedule is still tough this year. I don't know how. One day there'll be an easy schedule for those guys, but they play each other too. And Washington's the only team that doesn't seem to show up every year there. So we will try to do at least a mini breakdown of of the schedule that just came out. So a lot of exciting stuff. I got to be honest, man, the NFL is really keeping us afloat in terms of sports talk and excitement. There's really no excitement. I mean, I know UFC had an event recently.
This past Saturday.
WWE had a show where they murdered 2 people. I think threw them off the top of a building.
Top of the building, yeah.
So there's 2 dead wrestlers out there somewhere in the bushes.
No warrants for the arrest, though.
No warrants for the arrest. That is kind of odd. What else is going on? Golf has kind of rekindled the flame there, but nobody cares about most of that. So, in terms of live events, there's really not anything going on, but the NFL is giving us good content with the draft, with the schedule, and they're rolling it out smart. They're not throwing everything out there all at once. They're kind of feeding us slowly, and then hopefully that leads to a crescendo of the actual season, because as you guys know, I will revolt if we do not have an NFL season this year. It ain't going to be good. So you ready to get into quarterback rankings, Tom?
Let's do it.
Do you want to start from the top or the bottom?
Let's go 12-1.
Oh, 12-1. All right. Well, you're making me adjust here. I do know where we start at number 12. It is, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, this is only at number 12 because John would be whining and crying if we didn't put this guy in the top 12. I don't think he's worthy of being there quite yet. And to throw this in there, Tom, a little spoiler alert. Honorable mention, Ryan Tannehill, Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers, and Carson Wentz did not make the cut. Everybody knows I can't stand Aaron Rodgers. Honorable mention, though, because if there is some sort of a rekindling of his flame in terms of his, history and his ability to be a stud quarterback, I just haven't seen it. I've seen a decline, actually. Phillip Rivers threw a lot of picks last year, but he's in a really good offense this year, I think. So he's worth noting. Carson Wentz, another guy, if he's healthy, is a really good quarterback and a really good fantasy asset. And, of course, Tannehill had great numbers, but we both kind of discussed before the show. Not a guy that we think is going to repeat that.
He's on a QB1.
No, not by any stretch. And frankly, you would agree, I think, I wouldn't even draft him.
Not even as a backup.
No, because I just don't trust the situation there. I think it's Derrick Henry's show more than anything else. And that's that. But let's get back to number 12 on our list. It is Dr. Jones, as we like to call him around here, a.k.a. Daniel Jones, quarterback of the New York Giants. I have some concerns. He did fumble the ball 18 times, and I get what people say, well, who cares, because you're only losing 2 points per fumble. Well, that's almost 60 points, and that does make a difference, where you land in the standings. He plays behind the 25th ranked Giants offensive line. Not a good situation there, but they did have a nice ad in the draft this year, which I'll let Tom kind of break down. He's 11th in interception percentage. That's really bad. That's 11th worse. So he has a hard time holding on to the ball. He has a hard time not throwing to the correct jersey or throwing to the wrong jersey. And I'm not so convinced he's an elite talent. But what I do like about Dr. Jones is it does appear that they're trying to bolster that offensive line. And he can run. He's a dual threat. And to me, dual threats are really important for fantasy football. And I'll kind of break that down a little bit later on. I think that's what keeps him in the top 12 for me. But, man, there's a lot I don't like about Daniel Jones. Tom, you're a Giants fan. What's your perspective on this?
I had him as my honorable mention. He was my 13th quarterback. He has the talent out there on the field with him, with Ingram and Barkley and Shepard and
Don't
Slayton
forget my guy Slayton.
Tate.
Yeah,
He's
and Tate too. Yeah, definitely. I'd argue, honestly, and a lot of people would disagree, I would argue that the current setup he has now in terms of pass catchers is better than when Odell was there. That's my opinion. I think he's got a guy like Slayton that can be a really big, deep threat, or just a dynamic player in general. Evan Ingram is as good of a pass-catching tight end as you'll find. Golden Tate's a really good, solid veteran out there, QB's best friend type of guy. And Sterling Shepard is a great, slot receiver, kind of possession receiver type of guy. Oh, and by the way, Saquon Barkley is in the backfield. So if they can bolster the offensive line, which it appears that they are doing, I think you could see him as a QB1, but a low-end QB1. And I think if you look at QB1 last year, there was a big difference between QB1 and even QB2 or 3 in terms of points. So I think he can sneak into there. What about the guy they drafted, Tom?
Thomas.
Andrew Thomas.
Andrew Thomas, yes.
Yep.
Big left tackle. We need Nate Soldier out there. Was just brutal.
You hated that signing from the get-go.
Waste of money.
And they paid that guy a ton of money, too.
He was the highest paid lineman.
Is he still there?
I think he's still there. They haven't let him go.
But he wasn't, and I'm going to show my weaknesses here, but I don't think he was a left tackle in New England, was he?
He was.
He was, okay.
But he's a run blocking.
Right, yeah. So it doesn't really translate to protecting the blind side, so to speak. One would think he's not going to have to do that this year, and he may be an interior type of guy, maybe the right side, not sure what they're going to do with him there, but he was banged up too, I believe, with them.
He's been banged up for a couple of years now.
Right. So some good and some bad, in that offensive line, but hopefully they can pull it together and hold it together, especially for Barkley's sake as well. What else I like about Jones is he can, you dump off to Barkley and then just watch him go.
They got Deion Lewis out there now.
Deion Lewis is a great addition as well. Yeah, nice pass-catching running back there as well. So there's some stuff to like about Daniel Jones. I just have not seen it yet. I see Daniel Jones' trajectory going in the wrong direction. But if he can improve this year, then I think they can build on that. I hope for fantasy's sake he can, because I love those dual threats. Just not convinced at this point. What do you think? Move on to number 11?
Sure, we can move to 11.
All right, moving on to number 11, Matty Ice. I love Matty Ice because he's one of those guys, and the next few guys on this list are kind of like that. He's just reliable, man. He was 4th in air yards, which kind of surprised me, but kind of didn't, because when you have Julio Jones out there, it's kind of implied. But you don't look at Matt Ryan as one of those guys that throws the bombs down the field. But he did rank 4th in air yards. He ranked 4th in yards per game. He has never, Tom, played less than 14 games in his 11-year career, which kind of surprised me as well. A guy that's been around that long, you'd think the likelihood of having some injuries, some extended injuries would occur, but not really. He's been pretty healthy. He's played less than 16 games, only 2 seasons in his
first
career.
2 years, I believe.
I don't know off the top of my head, but within his first 2 years was one of them. Averaged 29.1 touchdowns over his 11 seasons. That's a great number. Ryan isn't sexy, but he's reliable. And when we look at quarterbacks, we can't look at just the quarterback. I look at the fact that he boasts the receiving duo of Julio Jones, whose peers say he's the best in the league still. And, of course, Calvin Ridley on the other side. Offseason additions of Todd Gurley and Hayden Hurst, I think, is going to bolster, if not improve, the offense. Hayden Hurst is good, man, and we know Todd Gurley's capabilities. They added Chris Lindstrom, who allowed 0 sacks and committed only 1 penalty in the 5 games he played last season, coming off from foot injury. Lindstrom in the lineup, I think, really changes the dynamic there. And it also improved the run game, going from 80.8 points per game, yards per game, when Lindstrom wasn't there, to 103.7 yards per game when Lindstrom was out there. They added him in the first round of last year's draft, and then added Matt Hennessy in round 3 of this year's draft. So I think they're really doing some good things on the offensive line. Matt Ryan has the track record and the talent around him. I think that makes him a potential steal in 2020.
I had him at my number 9 position overall.
Yeah, and I could definitely slot him there for sure. You've had Matty Ice over the years.
Yeah. 4,000 yards, 21 touchdowns is his lowest since 2011.
And that's like really effing good. Like those are great numbers, and I would expect the same from him. There is kind of like he deals with a lot of new offensive coordinators, and he's dealing with a new one this year, but it's Dirk Cutter, who's an offensive coordinator who he's dealt with in the past. So that's kind of, I think, going to help, and I don't think it'll hurt him necessarily in terms of in the past. Every time he gets a new offensive coordinator that first year, you see a little dip in his productivity.
But it's never under 4,000 yards and 21 touchdowns.
Nope. So he's about as steady as they come. I love Matt Ryan. I think he's a guy you can get in the 8th, 9th round, maybe even later in some
Usually
drafts.
later.
Yeah, and be a QB1 for you, and a solid QB1. We've got him at 11, but the guy, like this group of 5 guys that we're about to talk about, it's interchangeable
it's all the same.
in a lot of ways, yeah. So it's not an insult to him by any means. And we're going to talk about the next one on the list, unless you got something more on Matty Ice.
No, that's it.
So we're going to move on to Matty Stafford next on the list. There's a lot to like about Matt Stafford. I know he seemed a little injury prone in the past, but just bear with me here. So 12th best interception percentage, which kind of surprised me because I always thought Stafford was prone to throwing a ton of picks, but not the case last year. There's also a stigma, Thom, that Stafford is always injured. But in fact, he's only played less than 16 games in 3 of his 10 seasons in the league. So kind of similar to Matty Ice in a way there. Last couple of years have been especially rough for him, though. In those seasons, Stafford has only thrown less than 25 touchdowns once. And in his career, he's averaged 25.6 per season, touchdowns that is. That's including his injury-ending seasons, though. If you take those 3 seasons out, he's averaging 31 touchdowns a year. 30 touchdowns is a huge number. And when he's healthy, he's throwing more than that. And if you're worried about his numbers going down with age, it's not really true, because in 2019, Stafford threw 19 touchdowns before he had a season-ending injury. That's a full season pace of 38 touchdowns, which, by the way, would have been 2 more than Lamar Jackson and would have led the league. So the guy's still throwing TDs at a high rate. He also finished second among starting quarterbacks in pass yards per attempt, second in passing yards per game as well. And guess what? That would have put him second in the league in pass yards on a 16-game pace. Matt Stafford still got it, dude.
That back injury last year is brutal, though.
And it's kind of, well, it was last year and the year before, right? Kind of. So, yeah, I get it. That's a concern. But if he can move on from that, man, look at it. He would have led the league in touchdowns last year. I look at that as, I mean, and he's doing it year after year after year with the 25.6 per season that he's averaging.
But he's been in the league since 2009, so that's 11 years right there of wear and tear with a back injury.
So you think he's deteriorating?
I think he's on the downside, but your 10th, 11th quarterback, that's where he's at.
And that's the thing, man. If you're getting you're willing to take a chance on Matt Stafford because you're getting him in the 11th round or 10th round, as opposed to, you know, a guy that might be a Deshaun Watson where you got to pay that high premium for. These guys could finish similarly. They really could.
Oh, yeah. 25 touchdowns with that offense with those receivers out there.
I think it's a guarantee. Wouldn't you say?
If he's healthy,
If he's healthy, yeah. And that's the thing. We always tell you guys, don't think about injury. Don't let it get into your brain when you're drafting. But in some cases, with certain injuries too, you can't help but think about it. Look at Tony Romo. That injury ended his career, some would say a little bit prematurely.
Oh, yeah. He's still had a couple of years left in his body. Back injuries are hard on a quarterback.
Now that I think of it, Stafford and Romo are very similar in a lot of ways.
Romo's a poor man's Stafford, though.
A poor man's Stafford. Okay. Well, he's a really good announcer, though, so I'll give him that.
Probably the best in the business, but
I have no love lost in terms of on the field and his ability to be a winner, trust me. But he's a hell of an announcer. I like what he does there on CBS. You know, I got to tell you, I also like what Tom Brady does, especially now that I can say it now that he's away from New England. I kind of felt dirty, you know, complimenting him, you know, when he was with New England, but I feel a little bit better about it now. He's number 9 on our list. He's in Tampa Bay, and there's a lot to like. Believe it or not, I thought he was a little higher in picks last year, but he was 8th best in interception percentage, and that's probably as bad as it's going to get for Tom Brady in that category. 9th in air yards. That one really surprised me. I did not think Brady chucked the ball down the field much last year, but he ranked in the top 10 there, which was a big surprise. He was 12th in yards per game on an offense, Tom, that had Julian Edelman and not much else. Brady goes from one of the most bland offenses to the most exciting. He's got Mike Evans. He's got Chris Godwin. Both of those guys are studs. He's got Keyshawn Vaughn. a pass-catching running back who produced 1,000-plus rushing yard seasons, back-to-back efforts at Vandy. He's been added into the mix. You have 3 good tight ends, and who knows if OJ will still be there, but you have Cameron Brate, you have Rob Gronkowski and OJ Howard. There's a lot to like about this offense, and you got to believe that Brady kind of had a say in some of these selections, especially Rob Gronkowski. So let's talk about Gronk. The most career touchdowns, so a tandem. So the top 5. What do you think the top 5 is? The most prolific TD pass combos in history. Can you
wide
guess?
receiver or tight end or both?
Doesn't matter. Both.
Harrison and Manning.
That's number 1. Nice job. This is what I like about bringing Thom Martell to the table, because this guy's a walking stat book.
Young in Montana?
Young and Rice. Yep. Young and
Gronk
Rice,
and
85. Brady. Manning and Harrison, 112. Gronk and Brady, obviously on the list. I wouldn't have brought it up if they weren't. Was 78. There's an interesting Marino combo here.
Marino Clayton.
Yes, very nice. And the last one is one of your favorite all-time quarterbacks. You wish the Giants had drafted him.
Rivers and Gates.
Rivers and Gates. See, he's a walking stat book, ladies and gentlemen. Round of applause. So, yeah, Brady and Gronkowski are obviously on that list. And then the most touchdown passes from Tom Brady, Deion Branch with 24. This is bottom to top. James White with 24. Let's see if you can figure out the top 4 on this one.
Welker, Edelman, Moss, and Gronk.
Moss and Gronk. You got it right in a row there. Wes Welker. He does not have a cheat sheet, by the way. Wes Welker with 34. Edelman with 36. Randy Moss with 39. Take a guess on Gronk's number.
81.
78. Very nice. So he loves Gronkowski.
Why wouldn't he?
Ever since Gronkowski made his debut, Brady has been more effective throwing the ball on top of everything else. So it's not just the touchdowns, it's his effectiveness. Over the time with Gronk, he had a with Gronk, he had 121.6 passer rating. Without him, 95. That's a huge difference, man. Much higher rates on yards, first down, and touchdowns as well. I love the addition of Gronk, and I think that is really the missing link of what is going to not only put Brady in the top 10, but maybe the top 5. Here's my issue, though. Every single season the last 3 years, we've broken it down in previous episodes. Tom Brady's numbers have significantly declined toward the end of the season down the stretch. Can he hold up is my big question. I'm not so convinced. I've seen it every year over the last few years. What do you think, Tom?
I don't know about their offense down there. I'm not familiar with Tampa Bay's offense. Up here, he had his boy, I can't even think.
Edelman?
No, the offensive
you're making me draw a blank too. Josh McDaniels.
McDaniels
Yeah.
catered the offense to Brady. Does that go down there to Tampa Bay with him?
My opinion is I don't think he goes there without that being the case. He went to Arians and said, I'll sign with you, but just so you know, San Fran's interested, Oakland's interested, these other teams, New England, we thought they were interested. We're not so sure about that now. This is my offense. Get me Gronk. I'll make sure he unretires. Go get him for me. This is how we're running the offense. And I think Chris Godwin's going to be a big he's going to benefit probably more than anybody other than Gronk. Gronk's not going to be out there every snap.
No,
we all know
need him
that.
to be out there every
and
snap.
they don't need him to be. And they don't need him to block on a kick return or any of those weird things that Belichick had him doing. But I think Godwin's going to benefit a lot. I think Evans is going to be kind of the odd man out here. I don't think he's having a bad year necessarily, but those tight ends, Chris Godwin, that's going to be the big hunk of that offense. And I think Keyshawn Vaughn will factor in there as well. I think this is good, man. I think it's a good setup for Brady. And I think he's insisted that this is how we're going to run that. Similar to when Peyton Manning went to Denver. Let's not make any mistake about it. Peyton Manning was the offensive coordinator there.
Even in Indy he was.
Oh, right. Same deal there. So I'm looking forward to Brady in a Tampa Bay uniform, but this could go bad. People need to understand this could go bad. They do not have the easiest schedule in the world either. That's the other problem. But I like how the offense is built, and I think it is tailored to Brady. And I think Bruce Arians is going to let him do his thing until, maybe it's not going the right way and he's going to get his tentacles in there. But I think this is going to be pretty sweet. Brady could end up in the top 5
The
here.
good thing is they play Saints 2 times a year, Falcons 2 times a year, and the Panthers.
And
2
those
times a
are
year.
always
Always
high-scoring
hard.
games.
It's not the Jets and the Dolphins
No.
and the Bills twice a year.
No, where they can literally throw a couple TDs and run the ball the rest
Be
of
up
the
20
time.
nothing and cruise
Exactly.
control.
No, that's a great point, Tom, and I didn't even think of that. When you play teams that are good, you got to throw more in a lot of cases, and Brady's going to have to do that. It's going to be
He's
pretty
got
exciting.
Brees twice a year, and they're neck and neck for the
Those are
touchdowns.
going to be shootouts, yeah. And then, well, Carolina's nothing to speak of, but, you know, who else is in that division? Atlanta. So those will be shootout games, too. So it's going to be fun to watch, man. I can't wait. Can't wait. All right, number 8, Tom, Josh Allen. 631 yards rushing in his first season and 510 in 2019. He came in third in that category. Allen's an enigma to me. His skills are really primarily predicated on his ability to run the ball and throw the deep ball. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
We still haven't seen much in terms of the deep ball, though, in his career. Only 2 years, but hopefully Stephon Diggs can unlock that. Diggs is a huge addition to this offense, in my opinion. An offense that had Cole Beasley and John Brown as its top pass-catching options. John Brown is not a number 1 wide receiver, and he never has been. He's played 16 or more games in all but 1 of his 6 seasons, and has topped 1,000 yards only once, and has never caught more than 72 balls or 7 touchdowns in a season. However, Brown is an excellent number 2 receiver, in my opinion. It's about as good as you're going to get. And Diggs should be able to come in and be the true number 1 that I think that he is. Buffalo will need to throw more, though, to get Allen to get to his true potential. They finished 27th in the league, Tom, in passing yards per game. They're going to have to put their big boy pants on for Allen to be a true fantasy asset, and frankly, for his confidence as well, and for the team. We saw Allen in the playoffs. That was ugly. He looked scared out
He was
there.
out deer in the headlights out there.
And until they get him more passing reps, that's not going to change. What do you think of Josh Allen?
Oh, I love Josh Allen this year with Diggs, Beasley, and John Brown on the outside. Devin Singletary's going to be the lead back this year, not Frank Gore.
And it won't be Zach Moss either.
No.
I think Zach Moss will be in there, but he's not going to take the lead role from Devin Singletary, I don't feel. And yeah, Frank Gore, who somehow, by the way, I didn't put it in the news, but signed with the Jets. This guy just won't die. You can't finish him.
No.
There's no Mortal Kombat finish to Frank Gore. So where would you measure Allen against somebody like Brady?
I actually had Allen in my top 5.
Do you? Where do you have him ranked?
I have him 4th.
4th, okay. And I could see that because, once again, he's that dual threat type of running back. Is that what attracts you? Do you like, I mean, his schedule's a little tougher. I guess the big question is, do you think the Bills finally take the next step in their progression on their offense?
I think they win the division, and I think Stephon Diggs was a huge asset for them.
They just got to get him the ball.
And that shouldn't be an issue.
And with Diggs, too, he's a yak guy, too. Like, you can throw Diggs the ball 6 yards away, and he'll get you 27. He's just that type of guy. You know me, I love Diggs. And finally, I think he's going to have his potential tapped into, but they have to throw the ball there a lot more than what they have been. 27th in the league is not going to cut the mustard. It's not good enough. All right, on to the next one. We've had one old man on our list already with Tom Brady. We get another old man next at number 7, and that's Drew Brees. And I called for Drew Brees' demise a couple of years ago. I was not correct. I was a little off on that. He had a great year last year. 3rd best interception percentage in the league. And by the way, before I start, he didn't have a great receiving core. He had Michael Thomas and
that's it.
Some guys. That was it. Some dude from Japan, basically, was like his 3rd wide receiver, and that was like the best guy behind Michael Thomas. It was ugly. So he did all this with just Michael Thomas. And let's say Alvin Kamara on a down year, though. He didn't have a great year last year. He was also 2nd among starting quarterbacks in first down percentage. 42.1% of his plays, Tom, were first downs. That's almost half. That's crazy. He led the league in completion percentage. Played behind a number 1 ranked offensive line. The additional, I love the addition of Emmanuel Sanders to the lineup. What do you think of that?
Oh, yeah. They got rid of Ted Ginn and got Sanders. That's an upgrade for them.
Absolutely. Huge upgrade. Emmanuel Sanders is one of those guys like a Golden Tate, those under-the-radar veteran quarterback's best friend type of guys. I
He's
love
got two
the
now
addition.
with Thomas and Sanders.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Thomas obviously more athletic at this stage of his career. Well, I mean, I guess you could argue that. Emmanuel Sanders is still lighting it up when he's out there, man. He made some big plays once he got to San Fran last year. So, yeah, I love that addition. He's already got a 74% completion rating, does Breeze, which was number 1 in the league among starting quarterbacks. He was 3rd in passer rating, 5th in red zone completion, 7th in play action completion, 7th in deep ball completion, 3rd in pressured completion. Breeze is as alert and polished as he's ever been. Boy, was I ever wrong about the decline of Drew Brees a couple of years ago. I don't see him slowing down. This year, he's got a better receiving core and an excellent O-line, so he might even get better.
One of the linemen they released this past week, their offensive guard, the Pro Bowler, but
What the heck did they do that for?
They said he was on a decline.
Okay, well, there you go. Maybe they're staying ahead of it then.
But they drafted somebody to take his place, so...
Right, and it was the number 1 ranked line, too, so it's not like that one guy is going to put them at 20. I love the situation for Breeze this year, man. For Breeze. And I also like the fact that, like you said, now Tom Brady's in the division, Matt Ryan's there. There's going to be some shootouts here.
Should be fun.
Do you love Breeze, or do you just kind of like him?
Breeze.
Yeah. Where do you have him ranked?
I had him at 7 as well.
Oh, wow, look at that. So we're all in agreement here. You, me, and our boy John, who's, again, not here today. So he'll be back for Thursday's episode. Next on our list, Tom, is a guy that is a bit polarizing. You have him higher than us, significantly, but I don't necessarily disagree with you. So we're going to start with this. Number 6 on our list here at the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast is Kyler Murray. And just to give you a quick rundown of his stats, had a pretty polarizing year, I guess you could call it. He was 2nd in the league in quarterback rushing yards with 544, which is great. But it was kind of a tale of two seasons for Murray. It was almost week to week. He scored as high as 26.7 points to as low as 9.7. He didn't have a lot. He had a lot going against him. Arizona was working out a new offense with an undefined offensive line, bad, and an undefined wide receiver core. Guys with potential, but nobody really stood out, I guess you could say. He was sacked an NFL worst 48 times behind the 22nd ranked O-line in the NFL. That has got to stop this year. The good news is there's a dude by the name of DeAndre Hopkins that has arrived in Arizona. And what I really like about Murray, 3rd in money throws, 3rd in red zone carries per game, 3rd in red zone carries overall, 3rd in carries, 6th in deep ball completion, 9th in deep ball attempts, and 2nd in rush yards per game. So on a per game basis, he was better than Lamar Jackson. Last season, 7 of the top fantasy quarterbacks were, guess what, Tom? Dual threats. Murray came in at number 8 overall. And like I said, mediocre receiving group. Not a great running back situation until Kenyon Drake got there. It was pretty rough prior to that. I think he maximized his potential last year. He's good against when there's a stack box. He can use his legs. He gets out of the pocket, and he'll get you yards there. He's a great outside vertical passer. And he's got a pretty good schedule, too. Week 1, he plays the 49ers, and I know what you're thinking. That's a tough call. But do you remember last year? He toasted them twice. A team that made it to the Super Bowl. So that'll be interesting to see if he can do that again. But after that, the Redskins, the Lions, the Panthers, the Jets, the Cowboys, who on any given week can let up a ton of points. And after that, Seahawks, a little bit tougher. They've got the Bills. They've got the Patriots. Is that a tough matchup this year? Who knows? Then the Giants, the Eagles, and the 49ers again. Week 17 is the Rams. Nobody really cares about that. But my point is he's got a pretty easy schedule. I like Kyler Murray a lot. And what I like most about him, he does the two things that I need you to do at the quarterback position on my team. Run and throw that ball deep. If he can get those things done on a weekly basis this year, he could be where you have him ranked. And where is that, Tom?
He is my number 1 breakout quarterback this year.
I could definitely see it. And you guys know I've been touting Kyler Murray for a while. But they got to bolster that offensive line. They've got to improve that situation. And I know they did make some efforts in the draft there. But those are rookies. You never really know how they're going to pan out.
But he got Hopkins out there.
I know you do. You're very happy about the Hopkins at it. Who wouldn't be? So now you have Hopkins and Christian Kirk, who in my mind is a true number 2 anyway. He's not a number 1. And then you have Larry Fitzgerald. And then you have the young guys like Keyshawn Johnson, Andy Isabella is a playmaker.
Hakeem Butler, who was hurt last year as well.
Yep. And then you have, of course, Kenyon Drake in the backfield. There's a lot to like about Kyler Murray. And I'd rather have Kyler Murray at his ADP than Lamar Jackson at his.
Oh, I do too. I agree.
You know what I mean? It's just a much better value. We'll see how it goes. I mean, he could melt down, but I really don't think that's going to be the case. I love me some Kyler Murray this year, and if I can get him, at a decent price, I'm going to be all over that. I have a funny feeling, though, that come draft season, though, he's going to be skyrocketing. What we're talking about now, people are going to be talking about more, and he might go as a top 3 quarterback in the draft this year. I firmly believe that.
He could by the end of it, but
yeah, definitely. Because you know how it is. What we're talking about in May sometimes is totally different than what we're talking about in August. And I think that's going to be the case with Murray. So do your drafts now and deal with the injuries as they come. Oh, wait, they're not going to be doing anything. So nobody's
got
going
hurt
to
at home walking down the stairs or something.
falling out of the bathtub like the British Bulldog. All right, number 5 on the list. And I really, really wanted to put Murray ahead of this guy, but I didn't because Wilson has a better track record overall. He has a bigger sample size, and that is Russell Wilson at number 5. What I like about Russell Wilson is he's number 1. He's got the 3rd lowest interception percentage in the league, and he does throw the ball deep a lot. He's 7th in air yards, and he can run. My problem is his rushing yards have gone down the last several years, and more importantly, his rushing touchdowns have never really been there. There's only 1 year where he had a fair amount of rushing touchdowns.
They had Marshawn Lynch in the backfield forever, so
yeah,
you don't
exactly.
give him a
well, that's
line.
true too. So I love Russell Wilson. I just don't know if I love his value. I think where he's going, I could get a poor man's version of him maybe with Daniel Jones later in the draft. How early are you willing to go on Russell Wilson? Where do you have him ranked?
He is my 6th quarterback. So right around the
So
same
right
range.
in the same range, yeah. Do you think that they're going to run the ball more with him this year? I mean, he started off in his career with 489, 539. He was upwards of 849 rushing yards. The last 2 years, he's been sub 300, which isn't bad by any means. But again, he doesn't, he had 3 rushing touchdowns last year, which is cool. But other than that, he's never had more than 3, except for one season. He had 6 in 2014. And 2014 was arguably his best season. That's the year he had 849 rushing yards. But he's not young anymore. I mean, he's 31 years old. So is the running game just gone? And if it is his value still there?
I don't think he's going to run as much as he used to.
And that's a concern.
They have 4 running backs in that backfield. They don't need him to run. When he runs, it's out of necessity almost.
Yeah. The good news is, though, he still throws a ton of touchdowns. He's had 227 touchdowns in his career. He's only been under 30 touchdowns half of those seasons. And even in some of those, it's 26, 20, and 21. He's had seasons of 34, 35, and last year 31. So he's still throwing plenty of touchdowns. What do you think of the pass catchers on that team, Tom?
Oh, I love his pass catchers with Lockett and Metcalf. They got Greg Olsen as a tight end. He can come back to even literally what he was before.
Yeah, if he's healthy, he's as good of a tight end as they come. I love the fact that he's got 2, like you said, really dynamic receivers and Lockett on one side and Metcalf on the other. I'm just in love with Metcalf. He's not the most polished guy in the world.
He's just a beast out there.
He gets it done, though, and that's really all that matters. So I like Russell Wilson, but he's not in that top tier for me. And frankly, I feel like Kyler Murray really should be ahead of him, although we have Wilson at 5, 1 spot ahead. Every day that passes, I like Kyler Murray more and more. And you kind of had some courage putting him at number 1 overall, but I could definitely see him finishing there. There's no question about it. And like you've said before, that number 1 spot is a revolving door.
Every year it changes for quarterback for the most part.
Yeah, it does, definitely. And that goes back. You know what I mean? It's not like Aaron Rodgers every year. It's not. I mean, he might have done it a couple years in a row, but
Breeze and Manning and Rodgers
exactly.
and Brady.
It's just kind of bounced around. All right, number 4 on the list, Deshaun Watson, 12th in air yards, one of my favorite stats for a quarterback, 8th among starting quarterbacks in first down percentage, so he's keeping his team on the field and keeping himself on the field to score more points. Hopefully sees an improvement from the 21st ranked O-line in Houston. He saw a significant downgrade at the wide receiver position after the team gave away DeAndre Hopkins, but he still has, I think, a nice wide receiver group with Will Fuller, Kiki QT, Kenny Stills, and of course the dynamic Brandon Cooks replacing Hopkins, which isn't as bad of a replacement, I think, as people are making it out to be. And let's not forget, not one but 2 pass-catching running backs in David and Duke Johnson, no relation. If David gets hurt, I mean, you could easily see Duke slide right into that role. But yes, when you lose Hopkins, it's a downgrade. I like Brandon Cooks, but let's face it, one more concussion could be the last.
He's gone then.
Yeah. And Will Fuller's hurt all the time. Kiki QT's hurt all the time. So his healthiest receiver is Kenny Stills. If these guys are all healthy, that's a huge, significant bump for Deshaun Watson. And let's not forget Watson, I believe, finished 3rd in rushing yards. So he's going to get you rushing. He's going to get you rushing touchdowns. He was 1 or 2 in the league in rushing touchdowns. And that's a good foundation. My concern with him, another guy I could see Murray creeping ahead of, is who's he going to be throwing to on any given week out there? That's my concern.
That's true. If Stills is number 1 every week, or
it could be. It could be, and if it is, it's going to be ugly. He really has no tight end to speak of either, now that I think of it.
I don't believe so. No.
Yeah, it's just Ryan Griffin's not even there anymore, and he kind of showed up a little bit in New York. So there's a lot to like about Watson, but there's a lot to not like. I actually traded Watson for Lamar Jackson, but I gave up Watson basically and Leonard Fournette for Lamar Jackson. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
But at the same time, I'm not convinced. It's great that the Texans make the playoffs every year. I don't care about that in fantasy football. So Bill O'Brien might get his team to the playoffs every year. I don't like how he does it. And I think every decision he's making is not helpful to Deshaun Watson, who's coming up on a contract as well.
This year as well.
So he could be elsewhere. So and that's a dynasty league. So in a dynasty league, I want a little bit more, structure and comfort. But that's why I have Watson ranked high in a redraft. A lot of question marks there, though. Number 3. Who do you think number 3 is?
I'm going to go with Dak.
Yes, you're right. Dak Prescott. Is that where he lands on your list?
I had him at 2.
At 2. I could also see that. There's a lot to like about Dak Prescott. You guys hear me talk about air yards among quarterbacks. Air yards, running the ball. I will repeat that over and over and over again. Those are the 2 biggest things that you want to see from your quarterback. Or deep ball attempts, deep ball completions, stuff like that. Money throws. And then the ability to move around on, out of the pocket and get yards there. That's what you want out of a quarterback in fantasy football in 2020 at least. Prescott was 2nd in air yards, 2nd in the league in passing yards actually, 4,902, 2nd in attempts per game, 3rd in yards per game with 306.4 yards per game thrown, 2nd among starting quarterbacks in first down percentage, 38.4%, 5th in yards per attempt, 3rd in passes of 20 or more yards. See, there we go, guys. Guess what? 1st in the league in passes of 40 or more yards, and playing behind the number 2 ranked offensive line. Oh, by the way, he now has CeeDee Lamb on top of an already stellar wide receiver group with Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper. Another guy I could easily see finishing as the quarterback 1.
Oh, I agree. Just too much to like about him this year.
Yeah, and I think he's a good. I know he's chasing money right now, but what quarterback doesn't? I think he's a good kid with a good head on his shoulders. And you know what's not on his shoulders? The monkey known as Jason Garrett. So as a Cowboys fan, I'm really hoping that Mike McCarthy can right the ship over there. As a Dak Prescott owner, potentially, I love what I saw from McCarthy in Green Bay. They throw the ball a lot. And they throw the ball a lot on the goal line. And he said that he's tweaking his game a little bit. But they're definitely not going to go to a run-based offense, so Dak will get his.
Oh, yeah. I 100% agree on that one.
Dak Prescott, great prospect this year. And frankly, guys, have you just woken up from a slumber? Because he has been every year, since he's been in the league, basically. Dak Prescott has been an excellent fantasy football quarterback. So hitch your wagon to him. He's a lot cheaper than he's a lot cheaper than Lamar Jackson. He's a lot cheaper than Pat Mahomes. He might even be cheaper than Kyler Murray this year. I could see people drafting Murray ahead of Dak Prescott because of that Cowboy stigma. Oh, the Cowboys suck. Yeah. He's got the star on the side of his helmet. All right, let him fall to me, and I'll win the league every single time. So thank you. Number 2 for us is Lamar Jackson. Where do you have Lamar Jackson, Tom?
I got him at 5.
You got to talk to me about that one.
He had 36 touchdown passes last year, 1,200 yards rushing, 7 rushing touchdowns. Those are going to decline.
So the R word, regression is upon us. Okay.
The playoffs last year, he got embarrassed. That sometimes does not help quarterbacks the following year. Mentally, yeah. It doesn't help.
Yeah, I can agree with you on those things. The problem I have is ranking him any lower is just teams can't figure this dude out. And we'll talk about what he did last year, but 10th best in interception percentage. I mean, you look at a guy like Lamar Jackson, you look at Mike Vick. Mike Vick threw a lot of picks because he took a lot of chances. Lamar Jackson doesn't really do that. That's why Mark Andrews is his number 1 target. That offense is based more on safer throws. It's based on, almost like a New England Patriots style offense, a traditional Bill Belichick style offense. He, of course, led the league in passing touchdowns, as Thom said, with 36 touchdowns. He was 5th among starting quarterbacks in first down percentage. 40% of his plays were first downs, which is incredible. Of course, led the league in rushing yards. He beat Kyler Murray by 662 yards. He more than doubled Kyler Murray's numbers with what he beat him by, which is just incredible. So even if there's a 200-yard regression there, or even 300, that's still incredible for a quarterback. So even though I do agree with you, I don't think he's seeing 1,200, I still think he's going to run a lot. And that's the X factor of Lamar Jackson. I think that's what I'm going to call him moving forward on the Working Class podcast here, is the X factor. Because teams just can't seem to figure him out. You'd think that as the season went on, teams would have figured him out last year, right, Thom? But he had more rushing yards in the last 5 games than he did in the first 5 games. He had 425 in the last 5 games last year and 308 in the first 5 games. So they didn't figure it out. They weren't figuring it out. My concern for him isn't really defense's abilities to scheme against Lamar Jackson. There's 2 things that concern me about him. There is regression. I don't think he'll be the number 1 running quarterback next year. I always say running back when I'm talking about Lamar Jackson. I just can't help myself. I don't think he'll finish number 1 next year. I do think he'll finish in the top 3 based on his rushing. My other concern is the potential for him to get hurt, because when you get out of that pocket a lot, you're likely to get hurt more than, a Tom Brady or a guy like that. That's kind of a statue. He does slide more often than not. He's smart about it, unlike Robert Griffin was. But the second you get out of that pocket, you're in no man's land. So to me, there is some concern about injury. But other than that, I still don't think teams are going to figure him out running the ball. But he will regress.
Yes, and I also got Dobbins in the draft too, so that's going to take some carries.
So I'm glad you brought up Dobbins. What did I offer this guy? So there's a guy in our Dynasty League, and I do love Dobbins, and I think what you're saying, Thom, resonates to me. He's a perfect fit for a run-pass option. And a run-pass offense, I guess you could call it. Dobbins fits in perfectly there. I love the landing spot in Baltimore. Little crowded backfield, but I still think he's going to break out as early as this year, and by next year he'll definitely be the starting running back on that team that runs the ball an awful lot. But let me just, I got to pull this up here, Thom. I sent an offer for J.K. Dobbins. Here we go. He hasn't accepted it yet. I offered him just for J.K. Dobbins. All I want is J.K. Dobbins. I offered him Malcolm Brown. Granted, not a huge name, but he's in the mix to be a lead back on an NFL football team. 2 first-round picks, 2 third-round picks, and 50 fab bucks. I can't offer more than that. How do you turn that? Ernie, you got to take that offer, dude. That's how much I like J.K. Dobbins. Obviously a lot, given that kind of an offer to somebody. And yeah, he will cause regression for Jackson. But Jackson's not going to run 500 yards. He's still going to run a lot. So I think there's a lot of value still there. And of course, number 1 for me and for John is, without question, the absolute, undeniable Kavorka of Pat Mahomes. I mean, What is there to say about Pat Mahomes? I get it. He didn't have a year last year like he did the year before. But homeboy threw 50-plus touchdowns the year before. And let's not forget that he missed 2 games this year. So for me, it's not even close, dude. What do you think of Pat Mahomes? I know you don't have him number 1. Where do you have him?
I have him at number 3.
Whew.
It's
Getting
not like
hot
it's
over here.
on the bench. It's the 3rd.
Why?
Because I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him coming in this year. They're saying $50 million a year for him. That's a lot of pressure on one guy. He just won the Super Bowl. Regression that way. It's not like he can still 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns. It's not a bad year.
So you're saying expect a lot from him, but don't expect him to top that big year that he had.
2018 year is not coming again this year.
No, and I don't think it necessarily is, but I do think he's going to perform better than any other quarterback because he can run. He doesn't tend to do that, but he can run, and we saw it in the Super Bowl, definitely. And, I get that last year wasn't as productive, but he was hurt last year. And he started healing up around playoff time. And during the playoffs in 2019, he averaged 300 yards a game. He threw 10 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. I mean, his longest was 60 yards. He was sacked 6 times, which is a little bit more than I would have liked. But if you look at the numbers overall, 64% completion rating. He was the Pat Mahomes that we saw that year in the playoffs when he became healthy. And even before the playoffs, dude, he was still an absolute freak. Not the Pat Mahomes that we were used to, but he was still 8th in passing touchdowns despite missing 2 games. And then, of course, 2nd lowest in interception percentage, which is funny because coming out of college, that was the knock on him, that he didn't make good decisions out there and he had a lot of potential to throw interceptions, but he shed all that. I mean, he's with Andy Reid, and Andy Reid just seems to know what makes this kid tick. Those guys are just so in sync. It reminds me of Brady and Belichick, where they're just perfect for each other. So I love Pat Mahomes this year. And like you said, you got him in the top 3 easily. You happen to like, I think, Dak and Murray more, which is fine because I think all those guys are going to be really close by the end of the season. I will tell you, most years I wait on quarterback, and this past year, I was in my head, I'm like, I got to get a stud next year because you can't compete without one. But what do? You get the guy with stud potential that you get at a little better price. I got Pat Mahomes for nothing the year he went off. I got Lamar Jackson in the 11th round last year. I don't think there's a guy like that this year, but I think you can get Kyler Murray at a better value than a lot of those other guys. Maybe it's Daniel Jones. We don't know. But that's how you win your league, is you find those guys that end up studs in the really late rounds. I mean, Lamar Jackson in the 11th just last year. This is just last year, and he exploded this year, and then you trade him and get a ton of value for him. What was your top 12 overall, Tom? I'm curious to know.
I had Big Ben at 12, Wentz at 11, Brady at 10, Matt Ryan at 9, Watson at 8, Breeze at 7, Wilson at 6, Lamar Jackson 5, Josh Allen at 4, Pat Mahomes at 3, Dak at 2, Kyler Murray at 1.
And Big Ben did earn an honorable mention for us as well. So Tom's list is a little more polarizing than ours, but I like it. That's what I love about fantasy football, is everybody's got a different take. And of course, with those guys like those Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, and for us Big Ben that may not be in that top 12, those are also guys that can help you win a fantasy championship, because Big Ben's up there every year, man, when he's healthy. So there's some more risk attached to that. So just as a reminder for us, 12, Dr. Jones, 11, Matt Ryan, 10, Matthew Stafford, 9, Tom Brady, 8, Josh Allen, 7, Drew Brees, 6, Kyler Murray, 5 was Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson at 4, Dak Prescott at 3, Lamar Jackson at 2, and the undeniable Kavorka of Pat Mahomes at 1. I want to thank Tom for sitting in for John on this fun episode, Top 12 Quarterbacks. I want to thank John for giving me a break from him. I want to thank you, the listener, for being loyal listeners and tuning into the Working Class Podcast. Please spread the word. Talk to your friends. Tell your friends about us at the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast. Hopefully we'll have Thom back a little bit more and a little bit more often. A great friend of the show. We love having him on. So until Thursday, we'll see you then, and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Armchair Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for supporting the show. Until next time.